The air inside Grandma Rose's house still smells faintly of lavender and the lemon furniture polish she insisted on using every Sunday. It's been 3 years since she passed, but walking through the front door still feels like stepping back into a safer time, a time untouched by the ugly realities of adult life, especially the ugly realities involving money, debt, and desperation. The house itself isn't a sprawling mansion. It's a modest 2-story colonial in a quiet suburb of Boston. The kind of place where every dent in the wooden banister and every faded pattern on the living room rug holds 100 memories. It's the last tangible piece of history our family really has. And it's the reason I'm sitting here, heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs, staring at a piece of paper that could shatter everything. My brother Mark is many things. He's charming, certainly. He's the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately commands attention, not through loudness, but through a kind of effortless, golden charisma. But Mark is also reckless. He treats money like a seasonal visitor, welcoming it with open arms when it arrives, only to watch it pack up and leave without much thought for its return. For years, I've watched him chase one ill-advised venture after another. A high-end coffee shop that tanked in 6 months, a cryptocurrency investment scheme that vanished overnight, and most recently, a custom motorcycle workshop that hemorrhaged cash faster than he could earn it. Each failure left a deeper crater in his finances, but more importantly, a deeper erosion of trust between us. Our grandmother had been the only truly stable force in our lives after our parents split. The house was her anchor, and by extension, ours. When she wrote her will, she was clear. The house was to remain untouched, shared equally between Mark and me until a unanimous decision could be made to sell it. A decision she knew, deep down, we would never make. It was meant to be the safety net, the emergency fund, the place we could always come back to. I took her wish seriously. Mark, I now realize, saw it merely as an untapped asset. His calls over the last few months had grown increasingly frantic, the charm replaced by a sharp, desperate edge. He'd start casual. "How are things, little sis?" Before pivoting hard. "Look, I just need a quick loan, just enough to cover the shop's lease for a month. We're talking 5 figures. 5 figures he never ever intended to pay back. I'd always refused, gently at first, then firmly. I knew better than to pour good money after his bad decisions. But I hadn't realized how truly backed into a corner he was. I hadn't realized the lengths he was willing to go when I cut off his supply. The discovery was entirely accidental. I'm the executor of Grandma's estate, a role Mark begrudgingly accepted because I'm the organized one, the detail-oriented one. I was reviewing some old property tax records for a routine insurance renewal, just clicking through digital files on the county's website when I saw it. A notification flag, an almost imperceptible digital crumb, a preliminary inquiry for a mortgage application. The subject property was listed by address, 147 Sycamore Lane, Grandma's house. My hands started shaking so violently I had to brace them against the desk. I clicked the link, feeling a hot, sickening wave of betrayal wash over me. The application hadn't been fully processed yet, but the paperwork clearly showed Mark's name as the applicant, listing himself as the sole owner, claiming he was simply finalizing an old estate transfer. It was a lie, a calculated and audacious attempt to bypass me entirely, to leverage the one thing our grandmother had asked us to protect. He was trying to take out a massive loan against the home, undoubtedly planning to strip out every last cent of its equity to prop up his failing business, leaving me and our family legacy to deal with the fallout, the crushing debt, and the very real possibility of foreclosure. The sheer arrogance of it, the cold, manipulative disregard for me and for Grandma's memory, fueled an icy rage that replaced the panic. I immediately called the title company listed on the inquiry, my voice tight and strained, barely managing to sound professional. They were vague, citing privacy, but I pushed, stating I was the co-executor and demanding to know the status. The representative, clearly flustered by my insistence, mentioned that they were waiting on one final piece of documentation before closing the deal in 2 weeks, the certified deed proving ownership. 2 weeks. That's all the time I had. I sat there for hours, the tax records open on my screen, the scent of lavender and lemon mocking my fear. I thought back to the conversation I'd had with Grandma Rose 6 months before she died. She was frail then, lucid, but tired, and we were sitting on the porch swing, watching the slow golden drift of the autumn leaves. She knew Mark's nature. She'd loved him deeply, but she wasn't naive. She'd looked me straight in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering despite her age, and she'd said, "Sweetheart, some people need guardrails, especially when family history is involved. I've made sure this house, our sanctuary, is safe. If Mark ever gets into deep trouble, and I mean deep trouble, you'll know what to do. You're the responsible one. You always were." At the time, I hadn't fully understood the weight of her words, or the subtle, almost secretive way she'd handled the final arrangements. Now, staring at Mark's blatant act of greed, I finally understood. The key wasn't in the will that Mark and I both read. The key was in the conversation she'd had with her lawyer, a conversation I was privy to only because I'd driven her to his office and waited patiently in the reception area. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Peterson, had given me a manila envelope on that day, years before she passed, and told me, "Hold on to this. Only open it if the ownership of 147 Sycamore Lane is ever seriously threatened." I had kept the envelope tucked away in a safe deposit box, never opening it, trusting my grandmother's foresight. Now, the threat was very real, and it came from inside the family. I got up, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the bank. My hands were steady now, fueled not by panic, but by a cold, righteous determination to protect my grandmother's legacy from her own grandson. When I returned home, the manila envelope was in my hands, heavy with the truth. Mark was due to call me that evening, no doubt to sweet-talk me into one of his ridiculous schemes. This time I wouldn't be giving him a lecture or a refusal. I'd be giving him a revelation. I rehearsed the words in my head, the carefully chosen phrase that would stop his plan dead in its tracks. The house wasn't his to mortgage. It wasn't even technically ours. Not yet. I waited for the phone to ring, the envelope resting innocently on the kitchen counter, ready to expose his monumental mistake. The manila envelope sat on the kitchen counter, heavy with unread secrets. I knew what was inside was the key to saving the house, but my hands hesitated. Opening it felt like breaking a final sacred promise to my grandmother, a boundary I was only allowed to cross in the face of absolute betrayal. Well, the betrayal was sitting there in my back pocket, Mark's bank letter, cold and damning. I tore the paper along the seal. The sound was sharp, definitive, like the closing of one chapter and the furious start of another. Inside, there wasn't a single clean deed as I had half expected. Instead, there was a bound legal document with a heavy blue cover sheet. The title, stark and official, jumped out at me. The Rose Evelyn Daniels Irrevocable Family Heritage Trust. Below that, the document clearly stated the assets held within, specifically the real property located at 147 Sycamore Lane. I scanned the legalese, my heart beating faster with every paragraph, trying to absorb decades of complex estate law in minutes. What I understood immediately was this: the house was no longer owned by Rose Daniels. It wasn't owned by Mark and me as beneficiaries of a simple will. It was owned by the trust itself. This single legal fact changed everything. Mark's entire scheme relied on him presenting a certified deed, showing Grandma Rose as the deceased owner, allowing him, as an heir, to quickly transfer the title into his name before I could stop him, or before the full estate administration was finalized. But the irrevocable trust had performed that transfer years ago, while Grandma Rose was still alive and perfectly lucid. She had, with Mr. Peterson's help, effectively removed the house from her personal estate and from the jurisdiction of her last will and testament. The trust was its own entity, managed by a trustee. I frantically flipped to the signature page, searching for the name of the trustee, and there it was, signed in bold black ink. Narrator's name. I was the trustee. A surge of complex emotion, relief, awe, and a profound sense of inherited responsibility flooded me. Grandma Rose hadn't just protected the house. She had placed the final, ultimate power to protect it squarely in my hands. The trust dictated that the property could not be sold, mortgaged, or leveraged in any way until certain conditions were met. Specifically, the unanimous agreement of all primary beneficiaries and the trustees' written approval. The conditions were specifically designed to counteract Mark's exact brand of impulsive, unilateral action. More than that, the document contained explicit language stating that any attempt by a beneficiary to fraudulently leverage the asset would result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of their interest in the trust. It was a fail-safe, a trap laid by my brilliant, pragmatic grandmother years in advance, designed specifically for her troubled, charming grandson. I immediately called Mr. Peterson. He was retired now, but his old number still worked. I explained the situation, my voice trembling only slightly this time. The trust, Mr. Peterson. The Irrevocable Trust. Mark is trying to get a loan based on the old deed. The lawyer chuckled, a dry, satisfied sound. Rose was always prepared, wasn't she? Don't worry, kid. The moment she executed that trust, the original deed became nothing more than a historical footnote. The certified copy of the trust agreement, which you now hold, is the only document that matters. The house doesn't belong to Mark, and it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the trust. Mark can't mortgage an asset he doesn't own, and any title company that runs a proper search will hit a brick wall when they see the trust recorded with the County Registry of Deeds. His calm confirmation was the armor I needed. I had the legal high ground. The final piece of the puzzle was the confrontation. Just as I hung up with Mr. Peterson, my phone rang. It was Mark. The caller ID flashed his name, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel dread. I felt cold, calculated control. "Hey, little sis, just checking in," he started, his voice a little too breezy, a little too loud. "Listen, I was swinging by Grandma's place earlier, dropped off some old paperwork. Have you seen an envelope lying around? Important business stuff." "Oh, you mean the bank inquiry for a mortgage on 147 Sycamore Lane?" I said, my voice dangerously even. The silence on his end was immediate, total. The air vanished from his lungs. I could almost picture the blood draining from his face, the casual facade shattering. What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean." That's probably something old, from Grandma's papers," he stammered, the words tripping over each other. The lie was pathetic, but the speed of it confirmed everything. "Cut the garbage, Mark. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and you're failing, miserably. The bank is waiting for the deed in 2 weeks. I want you to meet me at the house tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., and don't bother trying to call the title company and withdraw the application. I already have. You're going to look me in the eye when I tell you what an idiot you are." He tried to bluster, to shift the blame, to threaten. "You can't talk to me like that. I'm an heir. I have rights. I need that money. You're just sitting on an asset while I'm drowning." "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The house," I repeated, ignoring his rising hysteria. "And Mark? I suggest you bring a notepad. You're about to get a crash course in estate planning, courtesy of the smartest woman we ever knew." I hung up before he could respond, my hand surprisingly steady. The night felt endless. I spent it rereading the trust agreement, memorizing the clauses, focusing on the forfeiture section. I printed copies of the key pages, slipping them into a clean, new folder, a direct contrast to the crumpled bank letter he had carelessly left behind. The house, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a stage set for a final, heartbreaking performance. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the faded wallpaper, the solid oak furniture. Grandma Rose had known. She hadn't left a ticking time bomb. She had left a fortress, and I was holding the key. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending her memory, her wisdom, and the trust she had placed in me to be the responsible one. The guardrail he so desperately needed, but consistently refused to respect. Mark thought he was pulling a fast one on a simple will. He was about to discover he was fighting a legal entity designed for the express purpose of defeating him. I knew what I had to do. I had to wait. And then, at 10 a.m., I had to drop the truth on him like a hammer. The next morning was going to be the end of one era and the bitter start of another. I just hoped the foundation of our brotherhood could somehow survive the impact. 10 o'clock the next morning felt less like a family meeting and more like a high-stakes negotiation where one party had already lost, but didn't know the full extent of the damages yet. I was sitting at Grandma Rose's old oak kitchen table, the very table where we had done homework and shared countless Sunday dinners. The trust documents were spread out before me, their blue cover a defiant shield against the morning light. I wasn't drinking coffee. I was drinking confidence, a cold, bitter brew of legal certainty and righteous anger. The clock on the wall ticked with unnerving loudness. Mark arrived precisely at 10:03 a.m. He didn't knock. He barged in through the back door, slamming it shut behind him, the sound echoing through the quiet house. He looked terrible, unshaven, his expensive jacket crumpled, the golden charm entirely absent, replaced by a twitchy defensive panic. "Where is it?" he spat out, his eyes darting around the room, settling on the kitchen counter, then the table. "I know you found the papers. Just give them back and we can pretend this whole thing never happened." I folded my hands calmly on the table, trying to project the steadiness I felt, thanks entirely to Grandma Rose's foresight. "Sit down, Mark. We're not going to pretend anything didn't happen. We're going to discuss exactly what did happen and what the consequences are." He didn't sit. He paced, agitated, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "Consequences? You're the one who's obstructing me. This is my inheritance, too. I have a life-altering opportunity, a chance to finally make the shop profitable. I just need liquidity, and you're hoarding an asset we both co-own. It's irresponsible. You're just like Mom, always playing the martyr, always judging me." The deflection, the immediate attempt to blame and generalize, was vintage Mark. I let him vent for a minute, allowing his own frustration to burn away his last vestiges of control. When he paused, breathless, I spoke, my voice low and steady. "First, the house is not an asset we co-own. Second, I am not judging you. Grandma Rose judged you years ago, and she was right." That stopped him cold. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "What is that supposed to mean?" I gently pushed the blue-covered document across the table toward him. "It means you missed a chapter in the estate planning, Mark. You've been focused entirely on the will, which is, frankly, irrelevant. Go ahead, read the title." He snatched the document, his fingers surprisingly quick, and his eyes scanned the cover. When he read the title out loud, the initial bravado drained away, replaced by genuine confusion. "The Rose Evelyn Daniels Irrevocable Family Heritage Trust? What the hell is this? I never saw this. This is fake. It has to be." "It's not fake. It was filed with the County Registry of Deeds 5 years ago, while Grandma was alive. Mr. Peterson, her lawyer, set it up. Go ahead and look at Section 1, Subsection B, the ownership clause." Mark's face, already pale, went ashen as he read. He muttered the legal text, haltingly. "The grantor, Rose Evelyn Daniels, hereby transfers and conveys all right, title, and interest in the real property located at 147 Sycamore Lane to the trust, held in perpetuity." He dropped the folder as if it were burning him. "She transferred the deed? But why? Why wouldn't she tell us?" "She told me," I said, leaning back. "She told me she wanted to protect the house from impulsive or leveraged schemes. And she didn't tell you because she knew this day would come. She knew you would see the house as a piggy bank to smash open, not as a legacy to protect." I let that sink in, watching the realization dawn. He hadn't just been thwarted by me, he had been legally defeated by the forethought of a deceased woman. He tried one last desperate maneuver. He bolted towards the hidden filing cabinet in the upstairs office, the one where the original deed was kept. He came back down 2 minutes later, eyes wild, empty-handed. "The lock is still intact. The deed should be there. If you don't have the deed, then this trust is meaningless." "Wrong again," I said, retrieving the folder and flipping to the trustee signature page. "The original deed is meaningless. It was superseded the day the trust was executed. And more importantly, the trust has an administrator. Go ahead, read the name of the sole trustee, the only person with the legal authority to sign off on a mortgage, a loan, or a sale." He didn't even have to read it. He knew. His gaze locked on mine, and in his eyes, I saw not just failure, but fear. He realized the full scope of my power. You're the trustee? All this time you were sitting on this? All this time, I was honoring Grandma's wishes, I corrected him. You needed the deed for your bank. I have the trust agreement, which states the deed is irrelevant and the trust is non-revocable. Your entire scheme, Mark, was built on a legal falsehood, and it has failed. But now we come to the most important part, the contingency clause, the part Grandma put in specifically for this situation. I slowly flipped the document to the final page. the tension in the room now so thick it was suffocating. Mark stood frozen across the table, his chest heaving, waiting for the final shoe to drop. He knew the argument was lost. Now he was bracing for the penalty. I tapped the final bolded section with my index finger, my voice losing its steadiness, replaced now by a deep sadness for the brother I was about to lose. Read that, Mark. Read Section 7, Article C, the one titled Contingency for Attempted Alienation of Trust Assets. He didn't move, rooted to the floor. I read it for him, the words ringing with absolute authority. Should any primary beneficiary initiate, execute, or attempt to execute any form of unilateral leverage, transfer, or encumbrance, including but not limited to the filing of a mortgage application, against the principal asset, such action shall be considered an act of severe financial impairment and shall result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of said beneficiary's interest in the Rose Evelyn Daniels Irrevocable Family Heritage Trust. The silence that followed was total. It was the sound of a brother's inheritance vaporizing into thin air, the sound of a legal hammer striking a final, irreversible blow. I watched Mark's face crumble, the realization hitting him like a physical shock. He hadn't just failed to get the loan, he had lost the house entirely. The silence was the most terrible thing. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, but in that small, echoing kitchen, it felt like an eternity, long enough for the gravity of the Forfeiture Clause to settle, heavy and irreversible. Mark's face, which had cycled through anger, confusion, and fear, finally settled on an expression of utter devastation. It wasn't the panic of a man who just lost a loan. It was the broken look of a man who just lost his life preserver. "You're lying," he whispered, the sound raw and rough. He pushed away from the table, backing up until his shoulders hit the wall. "You found this document. You made this up. This is you, being the good little watchdog, punishing me for not living your perfect, safe life. Grandma would never—" "Grandma did," I cut in, my voice shaking now, no longer steady, but tinged with the deep, painful realization of what I had just been forced to do. "Mark, read the signature page again. It's witnessed by Mr. Peterson and his paralegal. It's recorded. It's final. Your share, Mark, is now legally voided. The trust now holds the asset for the sole benefit of the remaining beneficiary. That's me." He slid down the wall, sinking onto the floor, pulling his knees up to his chest. He wasn't yelling anymore. He looked small, defeated, and suddenly very young. The charming facade was completely gone, leaving behind only the scared little brother who used to run to me whenever he was in trouble. "You don't understand," he mumbled, covering his face with his hands. "It wasn't just the shop. It wasn't just a bad investment. I borrowed money from the wrong people. Loan sharks, all right? The business was supposed to pay them back. I missed the deadline. That mortgage. That was my only way out. They gave me 2 weeks to produce the capital, or they said they'd take everything, including the house, one way or another. They weren't going to care about wills or deeds." His voice broke on the last sentence. This was the dark truth he had been hiding, the real desperation that had driven him to such a calculated act of betrayal. He wasn't just trying to get rich, he was trying to survive. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. Grandma Rose had foreseen the financial recklessness, but had she anticipated true criminal threat? Had her legal fortress saved the house only to condemn her grandson? The responsibility for his ruin suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked, the pain twisting in my throat. "And tell you what? That I owe $50,000 to Vinny the butcher and his cousins? You would have called the police. That wouldn't have helped. They would have just taken my business and smashed up my car. The bank loan was clean. It was the only way to make the debt disappear quietly." I stood up, walking away from the table, needing space to process the horrific context of his actions. I looked out the kitchen window at the massive ancient maple tree in the backyard, its branches reaching out like gnarled protective arms. This house had sheltered us. It had sheltered Mark, even from himself. I thought of Grandma Rose's steady gaze and her words. "Sweetheart, some people need guardrails." The Forfeiture Clause was the ultimate guardrail, intended to prevent the destruction of the asset, not the destruction of the person. But now it was doing both. I returned to the table and, with trembling hands, picked up the blue trust document again. I began flipping through the pages, going past the forfeiture clause, searching for any hint of mercy, any subtle contingency that my grandmother might have placed there out of pure, deep love for her grandson, despite his flaws. And there it was, buried deep in Article 8, titled, Trustees' Discretionary Powers Regarding Impaired Beneficiaries. It wasn't a repeal of the forfeiture, but it was a loophole, a path back from legal oblivion. "Mark," I said, my voice firming up as I found my footing again, "Grandma loved you. Despite all of this, she still built a contingency. It's not salvation, but it's a life raft. You forfeited your interest. That's permanent. But the trust gives the trustee, me, discretionary power to provide for the support and welfare of any remaining family members, provided they meet certain strict conditions designed for financial rehabilitation and accountability." Mark looked up, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. "What does that mean? I can get my share back?" "No, you cannot get your share back. That money is gone. The house is mine, as trustee, for the benefit of the trust. But what I can do, under this clause, is pay off your loan sharks directly, ensuring your safety and the safety of the house. But only if you agree to a non-negotiable set of terms that transfer all control of your financial life to the trust, effectively making the trust, and me, your financial guardian." I flipped to the relevant subsection and read, "The trustee may authorize distributions for the explicit purpose of settling outstanding debts and preventing personal or familial harm, provided the beneficiary signs a legally binding agreement to submit to annual financial audits, relinquish control of all business assets and ventures for a period of no less than 5 years, and submit to the oversight of a designated financial advisor employed by the trust." The condition was brutal. It meant giving up his freedom, giving up his business, and living under my thumb for half a decade. But it also meant survival. It meant Vinny the butcher wouldn't be coming for him. It was Grandma Rose's final, perfect guardrail. Save the boy, but make sure he learns the lesson. "So," I concluded, placing the document back down, my gaze unwavering, "here is your choice. You can walk out that door right now, tell your loan sharks you failed, and deal with the consequences on your own, having lost the house forever. Or you can sign a separate agreement, right here, right now, that puts you on a 5-year financial leash. I pay the debt and you get to live, but you will have zero autonomy. Which is it, Mark?" The decision was his to make, but the tension was mine to bear. I held the pen in my hand, ready for him to accept the only path left open. The pen lay on the table, poised next to the blank signature line on the drafted rehabilitation agreement. It wasn't a document of salvation. It was a contract of surrender. Mark stared at it, then up at me, his eyes searching my face for any hint of a bluff, any flicker of the old sibling bond that might grant him an unconditional reprieve. He found nothing but granite. The unconditional version of our relationship had been forfeited the moment he tried to mortgage Grandma's house. He stayed on the floor for what felt like 10 minutes, his breathing ragged, the sound of his struggle the only noise besides the relentless ticking of the clock. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about identity. Mark had always defined himself by his freedom, his ability to chase the next big thing, regardless of the consequences. Signing that paper meant admitting he was a failure, and worse, placing himself under the absolute, non-negotiable authority of his younger brother. It was financial incarceration, but the alternative was a physical threat that Grandma's foresight, ironically, had amplified by cutting off his last reckless escape route. Finally, he pushed himself up, slowly, using the wall for support. He walked to the table, his shoulders slumped, and picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly he had to grip it with his other, steadying the tip over the line. 5 years, he rasped, his voice thick with defeat. 5 years of you managing every dollar I earn. 5 years of no independence. You realize this is worse than going to jail, right? Because I still have to look at you at Christmas. No, Mark, I said, my own chest tight with sorrow. It's not worse than jail. It's better than Vinny the butcher. And it's exactly what Grandma knew you needed. You're trading your bad freedom for controlled survival. This is the last safety net she provided. He didn't argue. He just signed his name. It was a shaky, ragged signature, the mark of a broken man. As soon as the ink dried, the document instantly gained weight. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was the legal instrument binding my brother's life to the trust. I retrieved the agreement and Mark's earlier crumpled bank letter, slipping them into my new folder. The meeting was over, but the actual work was just beginning. My first call was to Mr. Peterson, who was quietly satisfied. He promised to have the official, notarized document prepared by the end of the day, formalizing the transfer of Mark's business assets and confirming the trust's legal guardianship over his finances. My second call was the hardest. I had to contact Vinny, the butcher's representatives. Mark gave me a burner number he used for them, a number I dialed from Grandma Rose's old rotary phone, a small, superstitious act to ground myself. A gruff voice answered, clearly expecting Mark and clearly ready to threaten violence. "You missed the deadline, buddy. The principal doubled and my cousin is looking for you. You should have been smarter." "This isn't Mark," I interrupted, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "This is his financial representative. I'm calling about the $50,000 obligation Mark accrued with your organization." There was a heavy pause on the line. "Representative? Who the hell are you?" "I am the trustee of the Rose Evelyn Daniels Trust, which now oversees Mark's legal and financial affairs. The trust is prepared to settle the debt in full, immediately, to ensure the safety of our family member and the assets of the trust. We prefer to settle this quickly, quietly, and completely. Cash payment in full." The man on the other end, clearly unaccustomed to dealing with an irrevocable trust instead of a sobbing debtor, grew cautious. He asked how much. I told him the exact figure. I then informed him that the trust required a release form, confirming the debt was fully settled, and that any future attempt to contact Mark directly would be viewed as an attempt to interfere with a legally recorded financial guardianship and would be met with an immediate federal injunction and possible police involvement. I wasn't threatening them with violence. I was threatening them with lawyers and overwhelming paperwork, a weapon far more terrifying to their kind. The deal was struck for a meeting the following afternoon. I had to empty a significant portion of my personal savings, money I had been carefully hoarding for years, to cover the debt. The trust needed time to liquidate other small assets, but Mark was out of time. But I did it. I protected the family. I protected the boy. That night, Mark packed up his few possessions from the spare room he'd been using at the house. He didn't say much. The easygoing Mark, the laughing golden Mark, was gone. He looked at me across the hallway, and I saw a mix of resentment and hollow relief. "Don't think this makes us even," he said, his voice flat. "I'm safe, yes, but you just sentenced me to 5 years of probation for a crime Grandma already legally paid for." "No, Mark," I replied, holding his gaze. "Grandma ensured the house wouldn't pay for your crime. I ensured you wouldn't pay for it with your safety. The trust gave you the discipline you needed. It was an act of love, Mark, not a punishment." He didn't agree. He walked out the door and got into his beaten-up pickup. As he drove away, I felt an extraordinary emptiness. The house was safe, the debt was settled, the family legacy was secure. But the price was the disintegration of my brotherhood. I had won the legal battle, secured the inheritance, and saved Mark's life, but I had permanently lost my brother to the very consequences Grandma Rose had tried to mitigate. I walked back into the silent kitchen, the blue trust document still lying there. My role as the protector was cemented, but the joy of the inheritance was utterly poisoned. I realized that Mark might resent me forever, but I had to live with the knowledge that if I hadn't followed Grandma's subtle, secretive instructions, Mark might not have been alive to resent anyone. The weeks following the confrontation were filled with the dry, methodical work of legal finality. Mark's dilapidated motorcycle shop was formally transferred to the trust. The designated financial advisor, a humorless woman named Ms. Chen, who specialized in asset recovery, took over his meager accounts and arranged a highly structured, minimalist budget for him. The bank, alerted by Mr. Peterson and now thoroughly spooked by the mention of the irrevocable trust, immediately canceled Mark's preliminary mortgage inquiry, sending us a terse letter confirming the property was legally untouchable. The legal fortress held, secure and utterly efficient. Mark took a low-paying, hourly job stocking shelves, a stark contrast to his former life as an aspiring entrepreneur. It was part of the agreement: steady employment, no independent ventures. He was earning an honest wage, paying his rent, and slowly, painfully slowly, learning to live within the guardrails Grandma Rose had imposed. Our communication was strictly transactional. Updates on his financial progress came through Ms. Chen, and any necessary contact, such as his required annual visit to the house to review the trust's status, was tense and brief. The resentful gaze he shot me across the kitchen table that day became the permanent state of our relationship. The house, saved from ruin, felt heavy with the weight of our shared tragedy. I moved into it permanently, selling my small condo. It was a logical decision. The trust needed its custodian on site. But the scent of lavender and lemon polish was now mixed with the stale, metallic tang of loss. Every room was a reminder of what we had sacrificed. I was the sole owner, the benevolent dictator of the family legacy, but the victory felt hollow. I had the bricks and mortar, but I had lost the warmth that came from having a brother who felt safe enough to truly belong there. I spent one long afternoon in the upstairs office, where Grandma Rose had kept her fortress, now unlocked and filled with her meticulously organized papers. I found the very first drafts of the trust agreement. They were simple, cooperative, a standard joint tenancy. But subsequent drafts showed the evolution of her thinking, becoming increasingly complex, increasingly restrictive, and finally culminating in the irrevocable trust with the devastating Forfeiture Clause. She wasn't just planning for her passing, she was planning for Mark's inevitable collapse. She had watched him, loved him, and made the heartbreaking decision to substitute her own soft, forgiving heart with the cold, unyielding power of the law. The true, final twist, the one that hit me hardest, wasn't about the money or the house. It was about her faith in me. Mark saw me as the warden, but Grandma Rose saw me as the only person capable of holding the line. She knew Mark would fail, and she knew the system would crush him. The irrevocable trust, with its impossible conditions and my ultimate authority, wasn't just a shield for the house. It was a mandatory intervention for Mark. The Forfeiture Clause was the painful lever that gave me the power to save his life from the loan sharks. It wasn't designed to take his money. It was designed to force him to sign the financial guardianship agreement in Block 4. Think about it. Mark tried to get $50,000 through fraud, which activated the forfeiture. His share was likely worth $250,000. The clause was disproportionate, ruthless, and legally genius. Grandma knew that Mark would fear the loss of his major asset enough to confess the underlying criminal truth. By setting the penalty so high, she created a high-stakes scenario that allowed me to swoop in and offer the only viable alternative: surrender to the trust, trade his inheritance for his safety, and structured rehabilitation. The entire structure was a deliberate, complex mechanism designed to leverage my stability against his chaos. She forced me to be the person Mark would hate, so he could live. Years passed, and the resentment between us calcified into a quiet, resigned distance. We attended funerals and weddings, standing yards apart, exchanging neutral acknowledgments. He never asked for his share back, not after the first year. He fulfilled his 5 years of supervision, completed his rehabilitation, and was formally released from the trust's control. He was financially stable, working as a manager for a small, reputable auto garage. He was safe. The house remains. It is the family sanctuary, a solid monument to my grandmother's unconditional, yet fiercely pragmatic, love. I live here still, the official custodian of our history. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the quiet rooms and touch the wooden banister. I think about the moment Mark signed the paper, the look of utter defeat in his eyes, and the horrible, profound realization that I was executing my grandmother's most loving, yet most devastating, final wish. I saved the house. I saved my brother's life. But I did it by revealing to him that the most precious thing in our family, the legacy of the house, was held in a trust, and that the ultimate purpose of that trust was to protect him from himself, even if it meant losing him forever. The trust holds the deed still. It always will. And I, the reluctant trustee, carry the burden of its security and the permanent, lonely silence it created between two brothers. It was the price of the guardrail, the cost of protection, the ultimate inheritance.